Well, I'm joined now by Dr. Bjorn Lomborg, the adjunct professor of the Copenhagen Business School and also the author of the book, The Skeptical Environmentalist. Dr. Lomborg, thanks very much for joining us. In your book, you talked about the litany, this kind of idea that environmentalism and concern about global warming was almost like a religious problem where it was completely unacceptable to question it or ask questions about the kind of received wisdom. Now, just last year, the YouGov polling company in the UK found that 43%, just 43% of people in the UK believed that the Earth was getting warmer and that was as a result of man-made emissions or human activities. Do you think that the litany, since you wrote your book, has been weakened?
Well, in some ways, Tom, and in some ways not. You're absolutely right. There's a lot of people who are very skeptical about global warming, and I think wrongly so. Global warming is real. It is a problem. But the issue is very often we sell environmental issues so hard that it's hard not to become skeptical. So in some ways, the litany is the exact reason why a lot of people become skeptical. But that doesn't mean we don't have lots of other things that we worry about, and I think often incorrectly so. It doesn't mean that there are not environmental problems, but it means we often end up worrying about the wrong things and focus on the wrong solutions that'll actually help very little at very high cost, instead of focusing on the places where we could do a lot of good first.
So just to summarize, your basic point on global warming is that it is important and that man-made emissions are having an impact, but that if you put it in the perspective of the wider problems in the world and the other problems in the world, and reduce it to a cost-benefit analysis, i.e., what can we do with the money we are prepared to spend? Your argument is that it is not as serious a dilemma as some others.
Well, two things. It is a problem. It's not the end of the world. And yes, if you look at the rest of the world and many problems like lack of clean drinking water and basic health care and just food, it's very clear that many people have much more urgent problems. Now, I still think we should fix global warming, but we should fix it smartly. That is, focus on the places where we can actually dramatically lower carbon emissions in the long run at low cost before we put up a feel-good solar panel that costs a fortune and actually doesn't reduce emissions virtually anything.
Okay, so here's my question. I'm about to go to Antarctica with Sky News to cover an expedition called 2041. And the idea of this expedition is to raise awareness amongst what they describe as decision makers of the future in oil companies, in Middle Eastern energy ministries, to make them aware that in 2041, the environmental protocols that are part of the Antarctic Treaty that help stop drilling and mining in that area come up for review. If the international community wants to remove that moratorium, they can in 2041. Would you say that a campaign like that is an example of smart campaigning or a smart attitude towards global warming or not?
Well, I'm not going to. I don't know what you're going to be saying, but I would offer this piece of advice at least. I think what we should recognize is most decisions that we make are trade-offs. There's never such a thing as just a free lunch or something that's just uniquely good. Remember, having a moratorium in a beautiful and wonderful, very unique places like Antarctica sounds like a good idea, but likewise, Wales is incredibly beautiful and unique. Why don't we have a moratorium there? Why don't we have a moratorium pretty much everywhere? Because we recognize that we don't just want beautiful and unique places, but we also need to be able to produce food, to have energy, to be able to run the world in a way that makes it possible for most people to live like you and I do. And so we got to weigh the consequences of both our actions. So I would suggest, rather than having a moratorium on our Antarctica, we should recognize, just like we do with Wales, that there's a trade-off. We should definitely have good environmental regulation, but we should also recognize being able to provide food, and especially, of course, for Antarctica, be able to provide resources for human better welfare might actually be something that we want to weigh up against the beauty and uniqueness of Antarctica.
So you think that there is a entirely valid cost-benefit analysis to be done about whether or not the impact of drilling and mining in that currently untouched, internationally protected science haven it needs to be done before, and that the decision makers of the future, the kind of people that are going to be going on this expedition, shouldn't write off the possibility that actually the moratorium may have served its purpose?
We should definitely not write that off. I'm not saying that there's an obvious or a simple cost-benefit analysis to be made, but I'm simply saying we do have to make these trade-offs. And if we make the trade-off and say we want a perfect, pristine, beautiful Antarctica, which I love, by the way, I like the idea of having that, we just have to recognize that means that we will have to exploit other places more and more heavily, and also possibly that many future poor people are going to pay the price in the way that they will have to pay higher prices for raw materials and fuels. So we have to be honest and say there's a price to be paid for everything. Let's be honest and talk about how much would it cost us to have some mining in Antarctica. That would be a bad thing in the sense that it would destroy the uniqueness, but at the same time, it would also have a lot of benefits, and we've got to be honest and weigh those up against each other.
But is it an either or though? Because you're presenting this like it's an either or question. Either we have this pristine wildlife and exploit somewhere else, or we use the resources that may well be there. I mean, would it not be fair to say that actually what this expedition is doing by showing the situation to future energy bosses is making them aware that actually what they need to do is avoid the either or and come up with good renewable energy options that are cost effective and that remove the need to get to the point where you have to decide between one or the other?
Oh, I'm sorry if I've been unclear. I don't think it's an either or. I definitely agree with you that you can have responsible mining and at the same time have a lot of pristine and unique nature. And likewise, of course, we can have a lot of innovation and ingenuity, take away a lot of the pressure for need for extra resources or for future fuels. I would love to see a world where we focus a lot of our ingenuity on finding renewables that are going to be so cheap that we won't have to drill for oil anymore. That'd be great. And then, of course, we wouldn't have this decision to be made in Antarctica in 2041. Likewise, I would love to see us become more resource conscious so that we actually use the resources that we already have better, which would relieve the pressure on finding more resources. But it doesn't avoid the discussion that we also need to realize there will still be need for resources in 2041 and going forward. And so we've got to weigh that up against how much mining can we do and how much pristine nature can we still preserve. I think we should try to go for a maximization of both, but we need to realize there is a trade-off.
Just going back finally to the litany. Obviously at the moment the Antarctic Treaty is the governing system, and many politicians, I'm sure most politicians who are leading countries around the world at the moment, if you ask them about the Antarctic Treaty, would reply that they are wholly committed to it, that it is the way to govern the world's last untouched wilderness. However, the UK, Chile, Argentina all have significant land claims there which are being put on hold, put on ice effectively in Antarctica. The US, Russia, they've all withheld their right to make claims in the future. Do you think that behind the rhetoric, perhaps, of the Antarctic Treaty, we should be wary that that politicians and governments are, actually very aware of what may be there and are more than ready to exploit it should they find a situation where they are able to?
Well, I find it hard to believe that if there was huge fortunes to be made, there would not be an incredible pressure to either break the treaty or certainly do something right after 2041. And that's why I think it's a much more realistic option to talk about, well, what do we do to encourage responsible mining, to encourage that we have a lot of protection installed, but at the same time actually also preserve a lot of the pristine nature of Antarctica. And that is a conversation that's much more healthy and much more realistic than the one that just says we're never going to have anything happening in Antarctica. It's a beautiful idea, but again, we've got to get back and realize we don't make the same exception for Wales or any other place. And we have to realize we need trade-offs and we need to be honest about them. And I would love to see if your project can help us be a little more honest about that discussion.
Dr. Lomborg, thank you very much for your time, and you can watch more videos just like this on skynews.com, on our live blog, and on the Sky News iPad app.